How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fin podcast. I am your host, Sean. My co-host Susie is out on date night tonight, so we don't want to get her in trouble with her hubby and screw that up. So, Susie, I hope you're enjoying yourself. But filling in is, the OG himself, Mr. Brian Schiller. Welcome back, sir.
What up, man?
Not much. How you been?
Oh, just been on the road, traveling around, going to all these shows. It's been really good, man. Like I've ran into a lot of listeners of the podcast, and it's always fun. Like I had a dude come in today because what does John Rapp call me? The Podfather or whatever. And this dude's like, "Hey, that's the dude. That's the paddle and fin guy, the Podfather." And I was like, "Oh my god, dude! Like, I can't escape it, But it's been really good, man. Just being back at the shows, and I got a lot of shows on the schedule this year. But running into the listeners, talking to everybody. I'm currently at the Indianapolis Boat Travel and Sports Show this weekend, and Chad Hoover's here, Gene Jensen, all the big Indiana folks, Richie Shaw, Matt Gibson.
How come none of those guys made it to Harrisburg?
Jason Young, yeah.
Yeah, Harrisburg was like light this year. Like last year we had Roland Martin and Jimmy Houston, and this year we had like a bunch of local guys. I was like, what? Nobody wanted to make the trip to Harrisburg? Come on.
I don't think it's the trip. I think it's the length of that show because the gal from Lakewood Products, she had posted a video or like a little reel right after the show ended, and she had like 2 Lakewood cases, and she was laying on the ground outside like I made it through the show. And then the poor girl had to get in the truck, and she had, what was it, like a 14-hour drive home to Green Bay. I'm like, dude, you are a trooper. And she's like, I'm so glad it's over, but it was well worth it. And she said there was a lot of great people that came through that show, and that's one that's on my list to go to because I've always heard good things about it.
It's definitely big, and when I first started going to it, the hunting was way bigger than the fishing side. Initially the fishing side was like stuck in the way back corner,
Sure.
And now slowly every year it seems like it's taking up more and more spots, and it's slowly encroaching on the hunting territory now. Hunting's still huge there, but definitely.
Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just gonna say it. That even the kayaks, like Delaware Paddle Sports had a huge booth this year, and I had to stand in line to talk to people there. It was busy. So,
well, that's like here. I remember the first time I came down here to do this show. Was it 2019? It was like right before the pandemic hit, I think, in January of 2020. And I remember like everything was in this back corner of the one building they call Tackle Town because they do a RV show, motorcycle show. One weekend's a Deer and Turkey Expo. It's a really big show. It'll take you like literally all weekend to walk through everything. But like the kayak stuff was all in the corner. Now they have, it's this huge section of the building. If I had to guess, it's probably 60. It's probably 100 feet by 100 feet, if not more. And they got a big demo pool in the center, and then they have all the different manufacturers there. Like Bonafide Native has a booth, Old Town has a booth, Wilderness Systems has a booth, New Canoe has a booth. The local kayak fishing clubs have a booth, and then the kayak shop, who's there for all that, Moving Waters Outfitters, they bring their whole shop down here, and like you buy a boat, they carry it out the door for you and strap it down or throw it in the bed of the pickup truck or whatever. And like they're super successful with it, but it's really cool with the demo pool there. That always helps sell some boats. But yeah, man, it's cool to see how far they've come down here, compared to like the first time I came down here.
Yeah, I always wondered why they didn't have a demo pool because I think there's space for it, because even with it filling up that one section that it's in, there's still like a lot of open space where
Sure.
people are kind of just milling around. I'm like, that would be a perfect spot to have a demo pool there, but I imagine that takes some logistics to get that up and running. So
Yeah, it's usually logistics, and then you're taking up floor space, which that's not cheap, you know. But and
well, they have at Harrisburg, they have like a trout pond where kids
oh
can
yeah,
go
yeah,
and fish.
sure, sure.
So I'm it's basically I would think it's very similar to that, but
Yeah, yeah, but the pools are usually, you know, 3, 4 times the size of the trout ponds, you know.
yeah,
So
right,
I
right.
mean, but it's costly, but it's effective, you know,
Yeah,
which is cool.
yeah,
Which is
yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
But
Well, cool. Well, I'm glad things are going good for you. I'm excited to kind of watch how you're, blossoming. I can't imagine the networking too. Like,
yeah,
just the
yeah.
amount of people that you meet in the industry has got to be
It,
insane.
it's cool, man. Um, like this show, the Old Town rep is here, and I know him from working with Rocktown. His name's Shane Tulowitz or Tuwitsky or something like that. But I always love running into him. You know, obviously on Team New Canoe, but like we all talk, man. It's not like there's like, oh my God, you're Old Town, get out of here, you know. So it's always good running into those types of folks. The rep from Bonafide Native, we just got a new rep here in the Midwest, so like chatting with her, Katie, good person. It's always cool to run into Hoover, Gene Jensen. Like, you know, it's like I remember back when I started kayak fishing, I was like, I could never talk to Gene Jensen or Chad Hoover. Like, oh my God, like they're a big deal. And
Yeah.
you know, Gene came over and was like messing with his phone, trying to figure something out, like sitting right next to me. And I was like, you okay, Gene? Like, you know what I mean? Like back in the day, I'd be like intimidated by that, you know, but you know, we're all a big happy family, dude. That's what kayak fishing's all about. So, but yeah, you're always meeting new people, new listeners, stuff like that, dude. It's cool, man. I just love talking fishing. So it works out.
No, I admit the first time I talked to Gene, I was first flattered that he even decided to come on my show. I'm like, who
Sure.
am I to get Gene Jensen on here? But he's
Right.
like, yeah, sure. And then,
Yeah.
and then we're like, found out we're both Braves fans and all sorts of stuff in common. And then, it was like a chatting with somebody I've known my whole life. So he was a
Yeah.
cool dude. So
They're
definitely looking forward
all
to meeting him in person. So
yeah, we're all normal people, dude. It's like, yeah, we may be, doing this over here, doing that over here, but we're all the same. We're all just goofy humans, you know?
well, the reason why I asked Brian to come on, and hopefully, the timing is pretty good for at least some people here. I know here in Pennsylvania, our temperatures have actually been warmer than normal. I actually got out on Wednesday to fish and didn't have to wear my dry suit. I probably should have because the water temperature was still pretty cold, but
Sure.
it was almost 70 degrees here, which in February is like crazy.
Yeah.
And so I definitely took advantage to get out on the water and not have to freeze my butt off. And, actually caught my, I've been trying to catch at least one fish every month. And I caught my February fish
I
just
saw
in
that,
time because now it's going back down to the 30s tomorrow. So,
dude.
and
It's cold here in Indianapolis. Like earlier in the week at home in Chicago, it was like, or outside of Chicago, it was like mid 50s during the week. And then yesterday when we left Chicago, it started snowing at like 11 o'clock in the afternoon. We didn't leave till 6:30, I think it was, and we drove through a snowstorm through Chicago. And then we get into Indiana, and it tapered off, and then the temperature dropped, and then I think we pulled into the hotel here last night. It was like 11:30 Eastern time, and it started snowing again. We're like, Jesus, dude, it's just following us, you know. But
you can't
what are
get
you gonna do?
away. Yeah.
No, can't.
But what basically prompted the idea for this show is you invited Jimmy up to go ice fishing with you, and just hearing the stories and you guys talk about how much fun it was, I'm like, man, I got to try that. And I've always been curious about it. It's been one of the few things that ways of fishing that I haven't tried.
Sure.
Um, I'm not always the best in cold. I have poor circulation in my hands and feet. So I'd probably have to, figure out ways to keep my hands and my feet warm. But I've
You
seen some
you'd
pretty
be
crazy
surprised, dude.
huts and that
Yeah,
are pretty pimped out. So that I was like, you know what, I just need to try it. And I was always curious what all you need just to get started. Like,
sure.
but I figured the very first thing we should talk about is how to be safe about it because
Yeah,
obviously when you're walking out on ice and there's definitely you got to be conscious of
yeah.
how quickly things could go bad there. So
Yeah, and they can go bad real quick. Like, every year, especially up by me, like, you know, suburbs of Chicago, up in Wisconsin. Like, I know I was talking to Brad Hurlbus a couple weeks ago, and some dude was up in Madison on the Madison chain, and he must have taken a wrong turn or something. And he went towards the river channel and went through the ice on his ATV, and unfortunately the dude passed away and things like that. So like things can go from like 0 to 100 real quick if you're not careful and you're not paying attention and things like that. But I'll never forget the first time. Well, Jimmy's only been up ice fishing once, but I remember because where we walk onto the ice is like where the actual boat ramp is that I usually go to on the home lake there. And he was like doing one of those numbers where he was like leaning his foot out, and like touching the ice, and like then he put a little weight on it, and then he'd like go back to shore, and then like take a step out, and then like go back to shore. He's like, "Are you sure this is cool?" And I get it. Like he's from Alabama. He's like never really experienced that before. And I'm like, here I am pulling the sled with the shack and all this stuff. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Let's go. Like, but I mean that's the first safety thing is like knowing what safe ice is and things like that. And like they say the minimum thickness for ice that is safe for a human to walk out on, a grown adult male, I guess, is 4 inches, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is really thick. It is pretty tough. I usually like to wait till it's like 5, just to be on the safe side. But like, have I fished 4 inches ice? Yes. Have I fished less? Yes. Was I an idiot when I did that? Yes. That was in much younger years and things like that. But um, that's the thing, right? Minimum 4 inches of ice. They say for a snowmobile or ATV, 6 to 8 inches minimum. Again, like when I had a snowmobile and I was pulling my shack out there, I always waited till it was at least 8, because you got to think about it. If you're flying across a lake or whatever, and then all of a sudden the ice gives and you go in, like you're going however fast you're going, and as you're going in, you're going under the ice, and that's where people get in trouble. Um, what a lot of guys do is they have I forget the proper name for it. We always called it an ice spike, but it's like a big steel pole. And
Mhm.
you'll see guys like in videos and stuff as they're walking out, they're slamming this thing into the ice. And the theory is if just in a normal drop, if that thing goes through the ice, it's not safe. Like
Okay.
you know, so it's a good way to test the ice. The other way too, before, guys started doing that was like go out and drill holes every 4 feet or 3 feet or 8 feet, whatever, um, so, and then obviously, like a lot of, so when you drill a hole into the ice, picture a slushy. You got all those ice shavings that are in the hole, and you normally have like what we call a scoop or an ice scoop, and it's like a ladle that you would use in cooking with like holes in the bottom of the spoon. I don't know the proper term for that. I just use
Okay.
it when I cook freaking noodles. But you scoop out all the extra ice with that. And normally they put like a measuring tape from like the top of the scoop up the shaft of the thing. So you could stick it in the hole, get the scoop under the ice, pull it tight, and then read, how thick your ice is and
Gotcha.
things like that. And then when you get into the far north, which sounds crazy to a lot of people down south, I'm sure, you could actually drive your car out on the ice. And usually that's like 12 to 14 inches minimum. And you got to think too, like up in Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, Canada, like that ice could get 2-3 foot thick, over the winter time, which
Right.
sounds crazy, but that's like driving on a freaking asphalt expressway.
Right.
So, but I mean, most guys, when they get in ice fishing, they're not driving cars out on ice. They're just walking out on a pond or a lake or whatever. Obviously, like rivers, you got to be super cautious because you have moving water underneath. Do some rivers freeze enough to go out and ice fish? Absolutely. Like I know guys that fish like back sloughs on the Mississippi, the Fox River, which actually is the river that comes out of the bottom of Green Bay, runs through Illinois, dumps into the Illinois River, which dumps into the Mississippi. Like that will freeze up in sections where the current isn't that bad and you can get out and ice fish and stuff like that. So, you know, rivers, moving water, creeks, stuff like that, that ice is going to get safer later compared to ponds and lakes and things like that. So, I mean, that's the first thing. And then obviously, like when it's early in the season like that, they got what they call ice spikes. And it's picture a tether for your kayak, and it's got like a handle on each end with like a little ice pick. And that's in case you do fall in. Now you could grab that, reach up and stick it in the ice, stick the other one in the ice, and pull yourself up on the ice shelf. So I always recommend that, if you're fishing early ice or late season ice, definitely have those on you because that could save your life getting out of the hole. Like everybody thinks like, oh, I'll just jump right back out. Well, when you're falling in 32-degree water, like your body goes into shock pretty quick and your muscles and your things like that. Like we've talked about that a million times about dry suits and things like that. So, it's the same thing. I'm not saying you got to wear a dry suit, but there's actually companies out there that make like your bibs and your jackets, for ice fishing that actually they put layers of the foam that's in our PFDs in it. So that way you
Okay.
float. So if you're going to get in ice fishing, like that stuff could be super expensive. If you're going to get heavy into ice fishing, I'd suggest like investing in that. But if you're just going out a couple times a year, giving it a shot, like you're totally fine. Just make sure the ice is safe.
Right.
And I will say this because over the years, I've heard numerous stories like so and so saw some dude out in the middle of the lake, so he thought it was good to walk out there, but didn't check the ice because he saw a dude out there. But lo and behold, that half of the ice or that half of the lake he walked out on, the ice was actually thinner, and dude falls through and dies.
Hmm.
So and usually you're carrying some kind of bucket full of rods and baits or pulling a sled and stuff like that. So you're holding on to that. You go in, that's pulling you down too. Hopefully you can let go or get released of that. But, something to be conscious of. That's the biggest safety stuff that I could throw out there. If you're fishing at night too and you're fishing in an ice shack or whatever, it's always nice to like throw some kind of like 360 type light on your ice shack, especially if there's a lot of ATVs or snowmobiles running around out on the ice at night by where you're at. Like I've fished on lakes where snowmobile trails actually cross the lake.
Huh. See that
So
I would never even thought that. That was something that never would have crossed my mind.
yeah. So like, and that's the thing too, right? Like, even though like my ice shack, right? It's made by a company called Eskimo, and it's red and it's a big hub blind basically. And but at night, like it's super dark. A snowmobile or an ATV isn't going to see it until they're right on top of you.
Right.
And normally you have like lights or like I got a Coleman lantern. I always
Hmm.
have that goes on the inside of the shack. So if I don't have a 360 light, like I got windows in there, so I'll pull uh, a window covering down in each corner. Not that the window's open, but the clear is there. So that way, whoever's around can see light from all directions coming out of the ice shack. So that way, they don't run us over because I've heard of stories of that too, like guys just ripping across a lake and didn't expect somebody to be out there at 11 o'clock ice fishing. And then they end up running over some dude because they ran right through his ice shack. So
Yeah.
So something to consider there too on
I
the
was
on the
going to say,
safety
definitely some
factor.
things to think about, right?
Yeah. It's a whole different world, man. It's not. It's like, picture being in a kayak with a motor. Like, you're gonna have 360 light on. You're gonna have navigation lights. It's kind of the same concept when you think about it. You're just on what we call hard water, not soft water.
Right.
So it's definitely a precautionary thing you got to do.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Cool. Well, that makes sense. So now that we know what we should have just to be safe, now what about other just basic things? Like, do you need an ice rod? Is it like, I know I've heard of tip ups, I've heard of all sorts of cool things like that. Like, could you get away with like just a short rod or like a Barbie pole or even something crazy like that?
I mean, I've seen guys do it for sure, and it all depends like what you're fishing for, really. Um, like, there are longer, heavier rods for guys that are fishing like walleye or northern pike or like some of your bigger freshwater species fish. Me personally, like when I ice fish, I'm usually going for either walleyes or panfish. So like I use a shorter rod. So like let's break this down, right? Like, what do I need to go out there? Like, bare minimum.
Right.
We always call them bucket heads, right? You need a 5 gallon bucket, um, some type of rod, and some type of auger, right? And
Right.
then
You
whatever
got
your
your
bait
yes.
is.
Gotcha.
So an ice auger, it's like a big old school hand drill. They do have like the gas powered ones
I've
or
seen
electric
some
powered
crazy
ones.
ones. Yeah.
A lot of what's going down now is guys are using drills, battery
Mm,
powered drills, and they're high voltage battery powered drill. And the ice auger part is actually like a oversized drill bit, and you could
yeah.
drill through, geez, 3 foot of ice with one of those.
That's crazy.
Um, but like, I have a gas auger, but I started out with a hand auger, and those are relatively cheap. I think the last time I saw like 40, $50,
Yeah.
and that'll last you forever. And if you ever dull the blades, they make blade replacements. They're like $12. But basically you're just shaving the ice down, making a hole. And they have different size augers too. So like if you're just pan fishing, smaller panfish, bluegills, crappies, perch, you can get away with doing a 4 or even a 6 inch hole. I like doing 8 inch holes because I can get pretty much anything up through that. They even make a 10 and a 12 inch like hole, which is
Mm,
stupid in my opinion. Like if I need that big of a hole, I could drill 2 holes next to each other, right?
true.
With
Yep.
with an 8 inch auger. But you're going to need some kind of auger. Rods, like again, it's going to be species specific. Kind of like, you're not going to use a crappie rod in your kayak to go out and fish for walleyes and muskie, really.
Right. Right.
So, like, one of my favorite rods I like to fish, and again, going back, like, and don't get me wrong, I've caught walleyes, I've caught northern pike, and I've caught in bluegill, crappie, perch, white bass, tulipies, things like that on my ice rod, and it's like a medium light, but it's got what we call a spring bobber. So there's this real lightweight, like, I think it's aluminum, might be steel, but it's like this thin strip of metal that comes off, and it's got a little hoop on the end. So picture like a basketball hoop, but taking the backboard and making it skinny and long and connecting it to your rod tip, and
Gotcha.
that's pretty much considered a strike indicator.
Hmm.
But you could see the slightest little bite when a fish grabs it or like a bluegill puts a bait in its mouth. So that's why I like using that. And I've caught all kinds of species on that. You're usually using like, sometimes I'll spool up with like 2 pound test or 4 pound test. I've caught pike on that. You just got to play them and let them run every time they want to dig.
Yeah.
But which is a lot of fun, right? Like it's like catching a tuna on lightweight tackle. But that's just my kind of like favorite go-to. And then usually like you're using some kind of like real tiny teardrop jig for panfish with like a spike or a wax worm. tipped on the back. A lot of the ice companies started making little plastics to imitate those, or putting like little tail tentacles on the back and things like that. And the other thing too that's big in the ice fishing world, which you're starting to see a little bit of in like the bass fishing world, is like glow in the dark baits. So like they'll use glow in the dark paint for some of those jig heads. So when you're fishing at night, now that fish can see that bait from further away, and they're honing in on it and coming at it. And then when you get into like walleyes and things like that, you're usually using like some kind of minnow. Um, like a lot of walleye guys, especially in Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, they use like a jigging spoon, and then they'll put just the head of a minnow on a treble hook on the back of that jigging spoon, and you're just like pounding the bottom with it and ripping it up and down, and the walleyes will just come and hammer it. So, in the scheme of things, you're essentially vertical jigging when you're ice fishing. Like you can't cast. You're just dropping lines down and working that area. And you'll hear the term hole hop a lot. So guys will drill like multiple holes kind of spread out in an area, and they'll hop around from hole to hole till they run into a school of fish. Because usually when the lake's that cold, the fish are usually out deeper, or they're in some kind of grass, and they'll travel around in big schools. So if you can find a school of fish, you can pretty much set up there. Or if they're on the move, now you can hop along the direction you think they're going. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you could do that. And then you mentioned tip ups. Tips Tip ups is like where you basically have a dead stick, right? Like if you were just dead sticking a bait out there in the water, you have it depends. Nowadays there's like different forms of tip up fishing where you could use an actual ice rod or a fishing rod, or what it was back in the day, and a lot of guys still use it. It's like a foot long board, and then it's got in the center where like this spool line drops down, and you pull the line off, you set your bait at your depth, and then you have a flag that you like fold over, and it hooks onto this little arm that comes off the spool. So in theory, when the fish grabs the bait, it's pulling the line, which is pulling the spool, which makes your flag go up. So that's tip up fishing or flag fishing, however you want to call it.
Gotcha.
So you could what's cool about that is you could be sitting in your ice shack. A lot of guys in the wintertime, especially when you get up Minnesota, Wisconsin, they like sitting in their ice shack, drinking a couple of cold beers, and they sit there and they just look out the window, and they're looking for their flags to go up because they can cover a huge area and spread them out, and they can sit in their ice shack, stay warm, and then as a flag goes off, you run out there and you hope that the fish still has the bait in their mouth, and then what's cool about tip up fishing is usually you're going after a bigger fish. Usually you're catching a bass, a walleye, a pike, a muskie. Sometimes on like the harbors in the Great Lakes, guys are catching huge brown trout, steelhead, things like that. And you're basically pulling that board up, or you're pulling some line off the spool, setting the board to the side, and then you're grabbing the line and you're setting the hook with the line in your hand, and you're bringing that fish in hand over hand. You're hand lining that fish in, essentially.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's kind of like, when I think about doing that type of stuff, it makes me think of like way back in the day, like first settlers, Indians, like how they fished in the ice. Like they had some kind of string, and they didn't have fancy rods and reels to do the work for them. So it's really cool. Like if you've never experienced that, like it's super cool to do in a different, completely different style of fishing than we're all used to. So I mean, that's kind of the gist of it. Like, to get started, go get a cheap ice rod, usually Cabela's, Bass Pro, any sporting goods store, bait shop in your area will have like a cheap rod and reel combo for 20-30 bucks. Like ice rods are cheap. They can get expensive, just like bass rods, which is kind of stupid because you're only using them for like 3 or 4 months out of the year. And I've gotten into numerous arguments about that, but whatever. You can go get a cheap rod reel combo for 30, $40. Pick up an ice auger for 50, $60. Bring your bucket. Tip ups can run anywhere between like 20 and $80, depending on how fancy you want them to be. But you know, pick up a 5-gallon bucket. You throw all that stuff in your 5-gallon bucket. You got your bucket in one hand, your auger in the other over your shoulder, and you walk out and start drilling holes and fishing, you know? There's definitely like some strategy, like, you know, when you plan out going fishing in a lake or a river, like you have to have an idea of where fish are. Usually in wintertime, they're deeper and they're relating to structure usually. So, you know,
I was just going to ask you that I was going to say what you know if you have spots on the lake that you know in the summertime, oh, there's a rock pile here or there's a submerged log here. Is that what you're shooting for when you go out, or to be in that
yeah.
general vicinity? Okay,
Yeah, so like I've talked about that before, like when we did the shaky head episode, right? Like in the
yeah,
summertime, I'm out there marking like brush piles and stuff like that on the lake. Well, what I'll do a lot of times is I'll bring, because I can pull my fish finder off my kayak and bring that with me. I'll put that with my transducer in the sled to get that GPS signal, and I'll go right to where I have a brush pile marked, and I'm like, all right, drill a hole, set up here, you know. And a lot of our fish finders that we use on kayaks, you can get what's called an ice transducer. And usually they're like, it depends on the manufacturer. It could go anywhere from like $40 up to like $200. But you could turn your normal fish finder into what they call like a flasher style
I was going to
fish
say
finder.
I think my my old Lowrance unit. I don't think my Garmin has it, but my old Lowrance unit had a flasher setting
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So you could do that. So what's cool about that is, right, like picture you have a circle, and along that circle there's all these little hash marks, and usually that represents depth of water. And then in that flasher circle you'll have colors, and it depends like what unit you have and stuff like that, but I use like a Vexlar flasher when I'm ice fishing. So like when you get a solid bar of red, that's usually your bottom, right? So you can see your bottom. And then you'll have like these hash marks that show up above it, and they'll go from like yellow to green to red to green to yellow. And that's usually a fish swimming through. And then when you drop your bait down, that'll usually show up as red because you got your transducer down the same hole you're fishing. So you can see where your bait is, right? We call it video game fishing, and you see where your bait is, and it's this red mark. And as you're jigging your thing or whatever, and usually like when you're pan fishing, you're not jigging too much, but there are times where like you drop your bait down and you'll see a red mark come right off the bottom up to your little red mark, and they'll just sit there and look at it. And then like I've jigged uh, bluegills and crappies up 10 feet off the bottom before they actually bite. And it's so cool because you can see those red marks just come up and follow your bait. And then, you know, when that red mark gets about even, you get ready to set the hook because, you know, more than likely that fish has got the bait in its mouth. Totally different style of like fishing with a fish finder compared to a kayak. Usually kayak, we're just looking for certain things. Yeah, sometimes we see fish, and it's almost like, now that I'm thinking about it, like right here, right now, it's like
the
that
old
was the
school live scope. Yeah.
yeah, that's like the original live scope or live view or whatever, you know, because you could see fish moving up and down. But so it's kind of similar to that, you know what I mean? And like when I talked about like drilling a bunch of holes and hole hopping and stuff, like usually, like, yeah, I'll go to a spot that I have marked, or I know, like, you know, I usually use some like landmarks on the shore. Like, all right, the
Right.
peak of this roof of this house is here. The fence ends on this house right here. And we're in line with that house up on that shore. All right, we should be good right here, you know? And I'll drill a couple holes and I'll drop my flasher down. And if I see a couple red marks moving in there or suspended up off the bottom a little bit, I'm like, all right,
Mhm.
we'll set up here, you know? So, I mean, that's something like I didn't get a flasher till, geez, dude, maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. like I always just like had spots and I'd go fish them. And if we were successful, great. If not, we had a good time sitting on the ice, you know?
Right.
But, you know, going back to what we originally said, right? Bucket, ice rod, some baits in your auger, you can go out ice fishing. Then you get into like the flashers, like we just talked about, or you get into like an ice shack because in the middle of winter, if the wind's blowing, it gets a little cold, you know? But the most popular thing right now is like the hub style like ice fishing blinds or ice fishing shacks. It's almost like a hunting blind, you know, a pop up hunting blind, and you know, that's what I use now. But I mean, literally, I think the heck is the floor space of mine. I think it's like 8 foot by 8 foot.
That's
So like
crazy.
we've literally we did this 2 years ago. Me and my buddy Eric. We went out one night and we were like, dude, let's do this. And we brought our cots out and we had my Mr. Buddy heater in there. We fished all night, did a fish fry off my camp stove, and then slept out there in our cots, like middle of the ice, middle of the
That's
winter. It
awesome.
was
Yeah.
totally fun, you know.
Right.
But uh, you know, you could fit like in my ice shack, you could probably fit like 3, 4 guys comfortably. Which is nice because you were talking about being cold, and I'm like, you have no idea because I got a Mr. Buddy heater, and it. I actually got like the conversion thing, so I could bring like a 20-pound propane tank with me if I want, or it'll take like the two single green 1 gallon cans that we all know from camping.
Right.
But that thing, when it's on high, I think it's like 18,000 BTU or something.
So
So
I'm
like
sure in a nice little shack that could get pretty
dude, it
toasty. Yeah.
gets toasty. I'm usually sitting in a hoodie and I got like my snow pants on or my insulated pants and some long johns. And I'm totally comfortable just sitting in a chair. And I remember when Jimmy was up because he was like, dude, I don't have gear for that. I'm like, trust me, you'll be fine, dude. Like the coldest part of this whole thing is walking from the truck to setting the shack up and from taking the shack down, walking back to the truck. So once we get in the shack, you'll be totally fine. He's like, dude, you guys are crazy. And then that's where there's that infamous photo. I was like, dude, like, it's not that cold, bro. I'll take my shirt off right now and pose photos like topless with these fish. And he's like, no, you won't. And I did it. And that's how that all came about. But it's, you know, it's, you could be super comfortable. And then like when you get further up north where they get like those thicker ice, the thicker ice packs, there's guys that have like permanent ice shacks. Like a good
Hmm.
friend of mine, uh, his son lives just north of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. He bought one of these ice houses, and it's got a freaking stove in it, a microwave, a heater, an air conditioner, a little place to go potty, and there's beds in there and things like that. A radio, you know. Some guys put satellite TVs on them, and they leave them parked out on the ice till it warms up, you know.
Right.
But and it looks like it legitimately looks like a camper that you would pull behind your truck, and they do these things, on the wheels where you could, you know, like on the front of a normal boat, you got the crank with the strap to pull it tight up on the trailer. It's
Yep.
pretty something like that, but you release the wheels, and then the whole trailer just drops down onto the ice, and, so then there's removable covers in the floor, and you drill your holes in the ice, and that's where you eat, sleep, and everything else in between, you know, out on the ice. Like, I remember it was the first time I went up there and I stayed in his permanent shack, and that was the first time I think I had ever been in a permanent shack. We were on Lake Mille Lacs, and he had his shack set up on 3 Mile Reef, and 3 miles means 3 miles. Like, we literally drove his truck 3 miles out into the middle of the lake
Wow.
where his camper was sitting, and they like plow roads up there, like the movie Grumpy Old Men. That is real, dude. Like where you got like cities out on a frozen lake. It's
That's
crazy.
crazy. That is crazy.
Like there's street signs and everything, dude. Like they put up street signs like 2 Mile Reef this way, 3 Mile Reef this way, so and so point this way. Like, and I remember we woke up in the morning, we were fishing, and like I went outside to go to use the bathroom, and dude, I thought I was on the moon because like the wind was blowing like 40 miles an hour, and it was like super hazy and stuff, and it was like you were in this dust cloud of snow. Like I imagine that's what the moon looked like. Like you couldn't even see shore, and you're just like, where am I right now? Is this real?
Right.
But
Right.
there's so many different like cool experiences I've had ice fishing. And I mean, ice fishing is like the first fishing memory I have. I caught a huge crappie through the ice as a kid, and that's probably as far back as I can remember. My dad says like I went out and caught some bluegills or something in a pond somewhere like before that, but the first fishing memory I have is ice fishing with my dad, and he had this little flip open ice shack, and we went to the lake he grew up on and drilled a couple holes on a spot he knew, and caught a bunch of crappies, and then I caught it was 18 and three quarter, 18 and a half or something. I don't know, it was 18 something inch crappie, which is huge for up here.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And like, and that's just it, man. Like Mille Lacs, like, we caught some walleyes, so, like, there's nothing better. Like, there's something that that cold water does to the meat of fish. Like, I do a lot of catch and release ice fishing, but, like, occasionally, like, if I'm gonna keep fish at some point during the year, it's usually during the ice season because that cold water just, like, firms up that meat a little bit, and when you fillet it and cook it, like, especially, like, that permanent shack situation, you catch that fish, you fillet it, and you're cooking it like 3 minutes out after you pulled it out of a hole. Dude, some of the best,
Hmm.
best fresh fish you will ever have.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I mean that's kind of the gist of it. I'm sure you got some more questions. I kind of went on a tirade there, but
No, no. I mean, you covered a bunch of the things I was going to ask about. I was always curious. I've seen the flasher circles, and I was curious, what you were actually seeing there. But that makes sense, that that you have, the red is the bottom usually, and then there's the red that is the fish. So basically, you're looking for red, but
yeah,
movement of red, right?
yeah, right, right, right. So like red is an indicator of like a hard surface, right?
Right.
Yellow is faint. So like you can kind of tell the composition of the bottom as well. Like sometimes I've seen where like you got this block of red, but like there's like a slight little line of yellow. And it's like, okay, that could be sand or muck or something like that. But you're looking for those hash marks above the bottom, so to speak, that are kind of moving up and down or in and out. But yeah, fishing with a Vexlar, it's like I know when Jimmy was up, I think I gave him mine. I was like, all right, dude, this is what you're looking for. And because like literally it was like shooting fish in a barrel. Like we were on a huge school of bluegills, and we probably caught between three of us the one day, we probably caught 200 fish.
Wow.
And like it was just getting stupid. And I was like, here, take this. This is what you're looking at. And then I remember he made some kind of comment. I don't remember what it was word for word, but it was basically like, okay, I get this. I understand now why you were catching like two to my one. He's like, it's on now. And he could see those fish, he could see his bait in that water column. And every fish he was setting a hook
Gotcha, gotcha. And I know you mentioned like the lure, like the baits that you're using. They're like little jig heads, almost like smaller than crappie jig heads, or like that about that
on.
size.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like they call them teardrops, so it kind of looks like a teardrop, but your hook is coming out of like the skinny end of the teardrop.
Okay.
Um, and the big thing nowadays is tungsten because you can get a smaller jig head, but have the weight. Because especially when you're on a hot bite, like there's times where like you better get that bait down to the bottom as fast as possible before those fish scatter off because they think like whatever this feeding frenzy is goes away.
Right.
But usually you're using like a teardrop jig or like some kind of jigging spoon usually. Um, colors can vary. Um, like say this is like your teardrop jig, and for those people that are listening, I apologize, but you could see like that's kind of like this is the skinny side of the teardrop. The hook kind of comes up and goes like this. So when you're vertical jigging and you have like either your plastic or a waxy worm or something like that, you're just like pretty much hooking it through the tip. So now you got this like little waxy worm or plastic out here, and it's just flailing while this is barely moving. This has just got a ton of action in it. It's almost
Gotcha.
like a ribbon tail almost. You know how that flashes more than the rest of the worm moves as it's working through the water. Kind of a similar concept, you got that tail action, and that's usually what they're reacting to. Usually for the panfish, what they're feeding on, like their forage at that time, is usually like some kind of like bug or uh, what's that proper term for it? I want to say amoeba, but it's not. It's like a little insect that's not hatched yet.
A nymph or a
Yeah, like nymphs and things like that. Sometimes there's worms that come out of the muck in the bottom of the lake, and they're feeding on those, things like that. Um, so, that's their forage. Now, when you're looking at like walleyes and bass and stuff like that, like walleyes are a cold water fish, so they're pretty active. Bass are pretty lethargic. So basically, unless you like hit them on the head or they haven't eaten in like a week, then you might catch one. I know guys that specifically go out for bass. I don't usually like specifically targeting them, um, but I will catch them on occasion just because they're like I said they're super lethargic in cold water. So you just don't want them to get gassed and not be able to recoup or whatever.
right.
And then pike are super active. So like the walleye and the pike, their forage is those panfish, whatever that smaller to them bait fish is in the water column at that time. So like sometimes in like specifically in specific lakes, like you can catch a perch or a bluegill or a crappie and use that as bait to catch a walleye or a pike or something like that on a tip up.
Gotcha.
So like in my home lake, like you're not allowed to bring live minnows in because they don't want it to like spread into this invasive species type thing. So what they did allow you to do is you can go out and catch a panfish per se and use that as bait, or you could use like dead smelt, things like that. We did a video on paddle and fin. It was me and Jay ice fishing, and I thought he was out of his mind. And I was like, dude, what kind of drugs are you on when he told me this? Because he was like, dude, we could go out and catch pike on a hot dog on a tip up. And I was like, dude, what? He's like, no, dude, like I've read it. I've done a bunch of research. Like guys can catch pike on hot dogs. I want to try it. And I was like, look, dude, if that's what's going to make you excited, like by all means, we can go ahead and do that. But and so he did in that video, he bought the most expensive hot dogs that were at the grocery store across the street from my house, and he bought the cheapest one, and he set them both out. And the cheap hot dogs caught him, I think it was 2 or 3 pike, and the
Wow.
one was huge, dude. It was like I think we measured it at like 30 inches, 29 inches, and we have so many pike in that lake. So, and I had never eaten pike, and Jay was like, dude, let's eat them. And I was like, I don't know how to clean them. He's like, dude, I did my research, man. YouTube video, blah, blah, blah. I was like, whatever, Jay, like, we'll try it. And we did. And because you hear that old wives' tale, like, pike are real greasy and slimy and oily. Well, if you fillet them right and you get all that slime and stuff off, like, the meat is really, really good. And we ended up cubing up that meat and breading it a little bit and making tacos, fish tacos. Dude, my wife was like, I don't know what this is, but you guys need to do this more. Like, so it was really good. It worked out. But like I said, if I keep fish during the year, like, obviously I'm not keeping bass and stuff. I have eaten bass. It's not horrible, but I'm
Right.
usually going after like a slew of panfish to have a fish fry later in the year, or some walleyes or some pike.
Gotcha. Well, cool. I mean, that sounds awesome. I've always been curious. Like in Pennsylvania, we definitely have times where it gets thick, but it usually takes a pretty good cold snap, and
Sure.
then it can go away just as quickly. So that's more that what held me back was just knowing that there's probably years I won't get to do it. You know what I mean? So that's why I wouldn't
Yeah.
just go buy an ice shack. Because I'd probably start with the bucket, the spikes and the auger, and
Yeah. Yeah.
go
Yeah.
with that because odds of me being able to do it more than 2-3
Once
weeks.
or twice. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just probably not in the cards for around here, but it definitely sounds like an experience to do it someplace where I can't even imagine the road signs and
Oh
driving
yeah,
out
dude.
3 miles. Like,
I'm sure they got that up in like New York is probably the closest place to you, Michigan for sure. But yeah, it's wild when you get up there up north, dude. Like, and you see all that stuff, you're just like, what is going on right now? But I get what you say. Like this year, I think we had maybe 3 or 4 weeks of good ice with this real mild winter we've had. Like, and that's something too that you kind of reminded me of is like you talked about cold spikes. So like typically it depends how cold you're talking, but like it's usually got to be consistently below freezing for at least a week and a half, 2 weeks before you could get that 4 inches of ice.
hmm
But if you get like 2 or 3 inches of ice and then you get a snowstorm, snow on ice acts as like an insulator. So the ice won't actually get any colder, which therefore unless it gets super cold, like it's not gonna continue to freeze and get thicker,
get thicker,
which
right?
is kind of goofy. And then two, like, okay, say you got 6 inches of ice, but then you get 2 days in a row where it's 50, that ice might be super sketchy. Like,
hmm
and that's the thing too. Like, especially if you got snow on top, now that snow turns into water, which is more weight and more pressure on that ice. So, like, have I fished on ice that had some standing water on it? Yep. Was it smart? Nope. Like, but use your better judgment. And I will say, like, when that water was on the ice, like, I think there was like 8 to 10 inches of ice, so we were definitely okay. It was just dumb standing in water all day. But
Well, yeah, because you gotta imagine, like, if you're saying, the weight of a normal person, if you add a couple, standing water on top of it, that's a
yeah,
heck of a lot more weight on that ice than just a weight of a person, but
for sure, for sure. And the biggest thing, man, is with ice fishing, you just got to be careful. We all read about it every year, like so and so went in, up on this lake, or so and so went in through the ice on this lake, and it's usually, like I said, early ice, last ice, or somebody that didn't know where they were and didn't do the due diligence to do the research on like that body of water. Like I know in the north up by us, like, you go to a new lake, you go to the local bait shop anyways to usually get, like I said, your wax worms, your minnows, things like that. You're like, hey, I'm going to this lake. Is there anything I should watch out for? And everybody comes into the local bait shop and usually they hear something or they know something. And especially too, like there's some lakes up north that have natural springs. And I'm sure it's the same way all across the country. But if there's a natural spring in the lake, now you got this consistent pressure coming straight up in this area, and it'll keep the ice soft.
right.
So,
A
like,
lot of
it's
times
good.
that's a different temperature than the water around it too, vastly, so,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So you got to watch out for that too, natural spring lakes, do your research and things like that, and just be careful. That's the biggest thing. But once you get out there, man, it's a ton of fun, and there's all kinds of different ice shacks out there, from like cheap like little one man flip overs to the hub lines I talked about, to 4-man flip overs, to whole like ice trailers that drop down on the ice and you're like in a condo in the middle of a lake. So um and like I will say this too, like if you want to like just experience it once, like ice fishing in general, and be comfortable and not like totally miserable, go anywhere up in like northern Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. Like there's some really good lakes and lodges that have those permanent ice shacks, and they usually have them on their honey holes. And you go out there and they give you like a little stove in there. Like I said, you got a heater, you got a bathroom, there's beds, and you just hang out there and with a bunch of friends and have a good old time. And then the one thing I didn't talk about was in those shacks, and you're doing the overnights, they got these things called rattle reels. And what it is it's a like a spool, right? Like picture like the spool that your fishing line comes on.
Hmm.
Now
Okay.
picture like the bulk spool, right? How it's like taller or
Hmm.
whatever. On the inside hollow part, they put like bells and like little like wood balls and things like that. So you set your line, you get in bed, and when a fish starts to take the line, that thing spins and the bells and stuff start tumbling in there. And it's like, hey, dummy, get out of bed. It's time to catch a fish. And you
Nice.
get up, and I've literally, in my buddy's permanent shack up on Mille Lacs, that first trip, I think it was like 4:30 in the morning. I heard the rattle reel go off. Nobody's getting up, and I get up, and dude, I'm like, I got a big fish, and I'm like yelling at my buddy Scott. I'm like, Scotty, get up! Like, I'm gonna need your help. Like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to get this thing through the hole by myself. And he's like, "Ah, well, it's just a little walleye." And I'm like, "No, dude, like this thing is huge." Like, it ended up being like a 28-inch walleye that I caught
Wow.
through the ice, at 4:30 in the morning. So, then you get the photos and everything, and do what you do, and then go back to bed and reset your line and go back to bed.
That's crazy.
Wait for the next one to wake you up, and then you usually got like the morning bite window and the evening bite window. But like a lot of those like shacks, like they'll set you up. If you don't have any gear, they'll set you up too. And it's a lot of fun, man, especially if you can get a group of like 3 or 4 or 6 guys to go. Like they have like big ones that'll sleep like 6, 8 guys.
Sounds
And
like
it's
we need to
just
do a paddle and fin meetup like
yeah,
that, man.
dude. I would be down for that. I would be down for that. You guys would have a ton of fun. But there's a bunch of resorts and stuff. Like usually it's like, dude, you get like 3, 4 nights for like $600. If you're splitting that 4 ways, it's the travel getting there and then the
Right,
four
right.
hundred bucks and then getting back home. But I know there's a spot. I think it's North Dakota or something. They have these huge jumbo perch there that guys catch. But you could like take a train there, and the train drops you off right at the lake, and the guide picks you up there and takes you right out onto the lake. I forget what it is. I'll have to look it up. If I find it, I'll like drop it in the comments on Facebook or YouTube or something. But yeah, it's
Awesome.
it's it's cool, man.
Cool. Well, there you go, guys. I mean, if there's ever some incentive to go out, it sounds like the experience is, we're all, super fanatical about being out on the water, and we fall in love with floating in our little plastic boats. But this is just a different experience, but uh, definitely sounds like an enjoyable one. So, you know, go out and give it a try. Make sure you're doing it safely, but definitely sounds like a good time. So.
For sure, man. Yeah, and if anybody's got any questions, feel free to hit me up. You guys all know how to find me, but yeah, man, it's a nice way when you got cabin fever and you just itching for the tug, like get out there,
Yeah.
do it, and you can get into it real cheap, and then like I said, like a lot of guys that get into it cheap, they go down the wormhole and they get the ice shack and the flasher and all that stuff, but you don't need all that stuff. Keep it simple like you do in a kayak. Just go out and have fun and enjoy it.
Yeah, I was watching, Mike McKinstry had been posted, like,
Yeah,
maybe for he had really good ice for 2 weeks, and he was out almost every day, but not no shack or anything, just he was, like,
yeah,
literally just a
just
bucket
hopping
in.
around
Yeah, so, and, that was what kinda reminded me that I wanted to do a show about this, because 'cause I'm like, "Hey, look, he's got some good ice, and he, had a fun 2 weeks of just, catching lots of little panfish and stuff." I was like, "Man, that's cool." So.
So there's a dude I follow on YouTube, and I wanted to make sure I was like telling the right story. But he lives in Minnesota. He does a lot of fishing. It's a lot of out of boats during the summer and stuff. But he's made some cool videos, and he used to be like one of the cameramen in the editor for Alex Perrick from the Guggen Squad.
Okay.
Um, his name's Sam Sobi, but his YouTube channel is Sobi, Sobi, and he does a ton of ice fishing up there, and he does a lot of the hole hopping and stuff like that. But he also just last season bought like a cheaper like permanent shack that he kind of fixed up a little bit. He put like a whole like Dakota Lithium like solar battery powered system in there and stuff last year and stuff like that. But I know he's got a couple of cool videos up. Like I'm looking right now, like he posted one 8 days ago, and it says insane school of overgrown crappies, and these things are huge, dude. But like his camera work, his film work, and stuff like that is really cool. But if you want to watch some like ice fishing videos and like see what like the flasher and all that stuff, like what we're talking about, like he's a good reference, dude, and he's a good dude. Like he tries to be informative and show you like what a good time it is to be out there. So that's just one of the ones like I could reference like to go and check out, watch a couple videos to inspire you to get out and go ice fishing.
And I know Ethan from Mule Fishing also does a lot, or ice fishing out where he is too.
Nice.
Yeah, so definitely check out his stuff too. So
Yeah, and we got the ice fishing video. We got 2 ice fishing videos on the Paddle and Fin channel. I
I
think if
will
you go
link
to the
those in the.
playlist,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll find them
the
and link them in the notes. So
yeah, the one we did like a year or 2 ago, we were messing around with an editor a little bit, and then the other one was the pike video. Then when Jay caught the pike on the hot dogs, so it was pretty cool.
cool. Well,
Right on.
Brian, dude, thanks again for coming on. It's always a
Yeah,
pleasure.
no
And
sweat, man.
wanted to give you before I forget, Ryan, my old co-host, had a bit of a mishap today. So he has a broken ankle. I think he's casted up and he's going to be laid up for a little bit. So any of you guys, I know a bunch of our listeners still are in contact with him. So
Yeah,
reach out to Ryan, just give him a quick shout out and say, we're all wishing him a quick recovery from his little mishap there. I'm sure he'll be back up kicking butt again, but for just a little bit, he's going to be laid up. Just wanted to give a shout out to him and say, hey, Ryan, we're thinking about you and wishing you a speedy recovery. So
yeah, brother. I hope he does better. I did a podcast with him a couple weeks ago
yeah,
on
he did a
on
new
New
canoe.
Canoe,
Yep, I
and
listened to that.
we got done. He's like, "Man, I kind of miss doing this stuff," and I was like, "Oh, somebody's coming back," So, but yeah, no, I hope he has a speedy recovery, man. Super good dude, and wish him nothing but fast healing for sure.
Well, and anything else you want to shout out? I know you've been crazy busy with all your new ventures. I wanted to
Yeah,
give you a chance to shout that
uh,
out a little bit.
just want to shout out Dale Hollow, that
Oh yeah,
packs up
yeah.
on 30X. That's April 22nd,
Second.
23rd, that weekend. So get signed up for that. It's down on Dale Hollow. It grows every year. Look forward to seeing everybody there. I know we've been getting messages since like October about it. Like, what are the dates? And so it should be a good turnout this year. And looking forward to seeing everybody. Yeah, so good stuff. And then go
And to
check out.
tease that a little bit, we may or may not be having Adam Reiser on a few weeks before that that
Oh,
tournament. I
oh,
talked to him a little bit about maybe coming on and
the
helping us
king
noobs out a little
himself.
bit. Yeah, so
Yeah,
be sure to stay tuned for that. That should be coming in the not too distant future. So.
yeah, for sure, dude. He's like the Dale Hollow man. Like every year,
Exactly. Yep.
he cashes a check in our event. But yeah, he knows how to find them on that lake for sure. So that's definitely, if you're coming down, that's one you will not want to miss for sure, because Adam's a wealth of knowledge on that.
All right, man. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, man.
Looking forward to maybe getting out ice fishing sometime. I'm gonna have to take a trip up and see you sometime. So
Yeah, dude, come on out, bro. Like I invite anybody. Like when the ice is good, like our ice is crap right now because, like I said, like earlier in the week it was like in the 50s. But yeah, one of these ice seasons. I know Jimmy's been like itching to get back up. He's like, man, I had so much fun. Like I didn't have to think about this or that. Like I just sat back in a chair and caught fish and enjoyed myself. I think we may have drank a couple beers out there or something, but that's the thing. It's fun fishing. You're just kicking back. You're not stressed out about things, and especially when
I'd
you're on
say
fish.
I'd say what happens in the ice shack stays in the ice
Yeah.
shack, but I've seen pictures, Somehow the pictures got out.
That is true. That is true. That is so true.
All right, man. Well, thanks again, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'll throw some links to a bunch of the things we've talked about, some of the essentials that you might need in the show notes. So be sure and check that out. Also throw in the links to the Sobe video and also the paddle and fin ice fishing videos. And if you have any questions, be sure to reach out to Brian or to me, and we'll get you in contact with the answers that you need, or whatever basic guidelines to follow, or
Yeah.
what you need to get started. So
For sure, man. Yeah, and there's like if you're questioning like what's safe ice and stuff, Google what is safe ice to go out on, and like you'll see 8 different charts. They all say the same thing. It's not all hearsay, like there's scientific evidence behind, the stuff I kind of talked about. So, but yeah, by all means, feel free to reach out. Love helping anybody get out and get on the water, whether it be hard or soft. So
all right, guys. Well, until next time, this has been the Bass Fishing Noobs podcast on the the channel on the Paddle and Fin podcast. We bring you the techniques, the tricks, and the tips to help you rip more lips. You guys have a good night.
see you.
See ya.